A blind German shepherd tapped Jonah Mercer's cabin window with a dented tin cup, 3 soft knocks that somehow rose above the snowstorm. Jonah had been a Navy SEAL once, the kind of man trained to hear danger before he saw it. But after the mission that damaged one ear and the winter accident that took his little girl, Grace's silence had become the only place he knew how to live. At first, he thought the sound was a branch hitting the glass. Then he saw her. A thin German shepherd standing outside in the snow, cloudy eyes fixed on nothing, a tin cup hanging from her mouth like she had carried it for miles. Jonah opened the door. The dog did not come in. She only tapped the cup once against the porch. And from somewhere beyond the trees, Jonah heard the smallest cry, a puppy. Stay with this story because by the end you may see faith in a way you never expected. And tell us where you're listening from tonight. We love seeing how far these stories travel. Jonah did not know it yet, but the blind German shepherd had not come to his window for food. She had come to lead him back to the sound he had spent years trying to forget. By the time Jonah Mercer opened the cabin door, the blind German shepherd had already tapped the tin cup against his window 3 times. The sound was small, too small for the storm. Outside, snow moved across Hollow Creek like the sky had broken open and emptied itself over the mountains. Wind pushed through the pines, rattled the old gutters, and threw white dust against the glass hard enough to make the whole cabin sigh. Jonah stood barefoot on the kitchen floor, one hand still on the doorframe, staring at the dog on his porch. She was a German shepherd, but barely the shape of one anymore. Her coat was matted and crusted with ice. Her ribs showed beneath wet fur. Her ears stood unevenly, one tipped from old injury or cold. Her eyes were pale and clouded, unfocused, staring past Jonah instead of at him. Blind. The word came into his mind before anything else. Not lost, not simply wounded, blind. And still, somehow, she had found his cabin. In her mouth hung a dented tin cup with a bent handle, the kind hikers used years ago, the kind Jonah kept stacked in a drawer before grief made him stop inviting anyone over. The cup swung gently from her teeth and tapped once against the porch board. Tin against wood. A thin, hollow sound. Jonah's damaged left ear did not catch it fully, but his right ear did, and something in his chest tightened. "Easy," he said. The German shepherd froze at his voice. She did not step back. She did not growl. She simply turned her head slightly, listening with her whole body. Jonah knew that posture. He had worn it himself. After the blast, after the ringing, after the doctors told him some sounds would come back wrong and some would not come back at all, he had learned to listen differently. With his eyes, with his skin, with the shift of air in a room. This dog listened that way, not like an animal waiting for command, like a survivor measuring whether the world was about to hurt her again. Jonah slowly lowered himself into a crouch. The cold rushed around his legs, but he ignored it. "No one's going to grab you," he said. No cages, no shouting. The dog's nose moved. She could smell the cabin, wood smoke, old coffee, wool blankets. The stew Jonah had made and barely eaten. She could probably smell him too, sweat, winter, loneliness. Still, she did not enter. She lifted the tin cup slightly and tapped it against the porch again, tink. Then she turned her head toward the tree line. Jonah followed the movement. At first he heard only the storm, then beneath it, almost swallowed by the wind, came a cry. Small, high, brief. A puppy. Jonah went still. The German shepherd tapped the cup once more, tink. Then she took one step backward off the porch. Her front legs shook, her body swayed. She was too thin, too cold, too weak to be standing, but she turned toward the dark pines as if she expected him to follow. Jonah looked behind him into the cabin. On the small hallway table sat a wooden box he had not opened in 2 years. Inside it was Grace's silver bell. His daughter had loved that bell when she was little. It had come from a Christmas market in town, no bigger than a walnut tied once with a faded blue ribbon. Grace used to ring it from her bedroom when she wanted him to come read one more story. After she died, Jonah put it away. He could survive gunfire, storms, broken bones, and silence. He could not survive that bell. The puppy cried again. Jonah turned back to the dog. She was waiting in the snow. Blind eyes, tin cup, a message without words. "All right," he whispered. "Show me." He pulled on boots and grabbed his coat from the hook. His shoulder brushed against the old emergency pack hanging by the door. Muscle memory returned before thought did. Flashlight, thermal blanket, rope, hand warmers, knife. He checked them with quick, steady hands. He had not moved like this in years. Purpose had a weight. He had forgotten that. The German shepherd turned carefully and stepped down from the porch. She walked slowly, not because she knew the way by sight, but because she knew it by sound, smell, and memory. The tin cup hung from her mouth and tapped softly every few steps against her chest. Tink, 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 Jonah followed. The storm swallowed them within 20 yards. The cabin light faded behind him. The pines closed in. Snow climbed over his boots and burned through his jeans. Branches dragged at his coat. The dog moved ahead like a ghost stitched together by willpower. Every few steps she stopped and listened. Jonah stopped too. The puppy cried again, closer now. The sound came from somewhere below the slope where the old logging trail dropped toward Miller's Hollow, a low patch of woods nobody used in winter. Jonah had walked that land with Grace once before everything changed. She had called it the Quiet Forest because snow made the whole place feel like church. He had not been there since. The dog stumbled. Jonah moved forward instinctively. She flinched before he touched her. He stopped. "Easy," he said again. The German shepherd stood trembling, sides heaving, the tin cup still in her mouth. Her paw prints behind her were uneven. One rear leg dragged slightly. She should have been inside by a stove. She should have been eating. She should have been held by someone who had not failed at holding what mattered. But she did not turn back. The puppy cried again. The German shepherd lifted her head and answered, not with a bark, but with a soft, broken whine. Jonah felt that sound in the part of him he kept locked. A mother. She was a mother. He moved beside her now, not in front. She seemed to accept that. Together they pushed through the pines, down the slope, toward the cry. The flashlight caught something silver near an old fallen tree. Jonah stopped. The beam steadied. A tiny German shepherd puppy lay wedged beneath a tangle of roots and snow, half hidden inside a torn piece of feed sack. Its body shook violently. Its eyes were not fully open. One paw was trapped beneath a strip of wire twisted around the root. The puppy cried when the light touched it. The blind mother dog dropped the tin cup into the snow and tried to move forward. Her legs failed. She collapsed. Jonah lunged, then stopped himself from grabbing her too fast. He slid to his knees in the snow beside her, close enough that she could hear him breathe. "I see him," he said. "I see your baby." The dog's head lifted. For the first time, her cloudy eyes turned toward him as if she could see through something deeper than sight. Jonah crawled to the puppy. The wire was tight, frozen into the root. He pulled off his glove and worked with bare fingers because gloves were too clumsy. Cold bit into his skin instantly. The puppy whimpered, tiny mouth opening and closing. "I know," Jonah whispered. "I know, little one." He loosened the wire slowly, careful not to tear the skin. When it finally slipped free, the puppy's paw fell limp into his palm, alive, weak but alive. Jonah wrapped the puppy in the thermal blanket and tucked it inside his coat. The mother dog lifted her head again. Jonah brought the puppy close enough for her to smell. The German shepherd touched her nose to the bundle. A sound came from her chest, not relief, not yet. Because then another cry rose from deeper in the hollow. Jonah turned. The mother dog's ears lifted. There was another puppy. Jonah Mercer stood frozen in the storm with one rescued puppy against his chest and a blind German shepherd collapsed in the snow at his feet. For a moment the world narrowed to three sounds: the wind through the pines, the puppy's faint breathing inside his coat, and another cry from somewhere deeper in Miller's Hollow. The mother dog heard it too. She tried to rise. Her paws scraped against the snow, but her body had nothing left. She fell back down with a sound so soft Jonah almost missed it. He crouched beside her. "No," he said gently. "You've done enough." The German shepherd turned her head toward the cry, trembling with an urgency that did not care about her body's limits. Jonah knew that kind of urgency. It was the kind that came when love kept moving after strength was gone. He looked down the slope. The flashlight beam reached only a few yards before snow swallowed it. The second puppy could be close or far, hidden under roots, trapped in a ditch, half buried. The storm was covering tracks quickly. Jonah had to choose: carry the first puppy and the mother back to the cabin, or search deeper while both weakened in the cold. He touched the radio clipped inside his pack. Dead. The mountains had eaten the signal. "Of course," he muttered. The German shepherd gave a thin whine, not for herself, for the hidden puppy. Jonah looked at her, then back toward the cabin, light barely glowing through the trees. He could not carry the mother dog, the puppy, and search at the same time. He needed help. There was only one person in Hollow Creek who would answer this kind of call in this kind of storm: Miriam Cole, the old widow who ran the rescue barn on the edge of town. She had been trying to get Jonah to foster a dog for years, and Jonah had been finding ways to say no without using the word no. He pulled out his phone. One bar appeared, then vanished. He lifted it higher. Nothing. The puppy inside his coat stirred. Jonah looked at the blind German shepherd. "I'll be right back," he said. The dog's ears moved toward him. "I swear it." He took the tin cup from the snow and placed it beside her muzzle as if returning something sacred. Then he marked the spot with a flare, cracked it, and pressed it into the snow near a stump. Red light bled through the storm. The mother dog did not move. She only listened as Jonah turned and climbed back toward the cabin with the rescued puppy held close to his chest. Every step back felt like betrayal. The second cry followed him, faint, fainter. By the time Jonah reached the cabin, his lungs burned and his hands were numb. He kicked the door open, stepped inside, and placed the puppy on a towel near the stove, not too close to the heat. The tiny body shook under the thermal blanket. Jonah grabbed warm towels, a shallow bowl, and the old landline phone from the wall. Miriam answered on the fourth ring. "Jonah Mercer," she said, voice rough with sleep and suspicion. "If this is about the south fence again, I told you that deer did not belong to me." "Miriam, I found a blind German shepherd in the storm." Silence, then bedsprings creaked. "How bad?" "Starved, exhausted, maybe injured. She led me to a puppy trapped under roots. There's at least one more out there." The old woman's voice changed completely. "Where?" "Miller's Hollow, below my cabin. I'm coming. The road is bad. I've lived in Wyoming 71 years. The road is always bad. Miriam, keep the puppy warm. Don't force milk. If you have honey, rub a little on the gums. If he fades, I'll bring supplies." The line clicked dead. Jonah stared at the phone. Then he looked down at the puppy. The tiny German shepherd had stopped crying. That worried him more than the crying had. He knelt and touched the towel near it. "Stay," he whispered. "Your mother did all this to get you here. You stay." The word mother pulled something old and sharp through him. Grace had been 7 when she died. 7 years old, 2 missing front teeth, wild brown hair, and a laugh that turned every room into mourning. She had loved dogs but never had one because Jonah had always been leaving. Training, deployment, recovery, another assignment, another excuse. When he finally came home for good, it was after the accident. Too late to say yes. Too late for the dog. Too late for many things. A knock came at the door 15 minutes later. Jonah opened it to find Miriam Cole standing in the storm wearing a red coat, heavy boots, and the expression of a woman who had already decided everyone was moving too slowly. She pushed past him with a medical bag in one hand and a crate in the other. "Where's the pup?" Jonah pointed. Miriam knelt by the stove, hands gentle despite her sharp voice. "Oh, baby," she whispered. That was Miriam, bark like gravel, hands like prayer. She checked the puppy quickly. Gums, breathing, body temperature, pause, male, cold, hungry, scared half to death, but stubborn. She glanced up. "Takes after his mother, sounds like." "The mother is still out there." Miriam's face tightened. "You left her." The words struck harder than Jonah expected. "I couldn't carry both." "I didn't ask why." "I asked if you left her." Jonah's jaw clenched. "Yes." Miriam stood. "Then we go back." She wrapped the puppy better, placed him in the crate near the stove with warm towels, and gave Jonah instructions so quickly he barely kept up. Then she stopped by the hallway table. Her eyes landed on the wooden box, Grace's bell box. The cabin seemed to shrink around it. Miriam's voice softened. "You still have it." Jonah did not answer. Miriam had known Grace. Everyone in Hollow Creek had. She had given Grace a stuffed dog once at the county fair, a scruffy little toy with one button eye. Grace had named it Captain. "Not now," Jonah said. Miriam looked at him for a long moment. Then she nodded. "No, not now." They went back into the storm together. The flare still burned red in the hollow, half buried but visible. The blind German shepherd lay exactly where Jonah had left her, the tin cup beside her muzzle, snow collecting along her back. For one terrible second, Jonah thought she was dead. Then her ear moved. Miriam dropped to her knees beside her. "Hello, sweetheart," she said. "You made quite a mess of this man's evening." The dog's nose twitched. Miriam examined her quickly. "Severe exhaustion, dehydrated, malnourished. She may be newly whelped." She looked sharply at Jonah. "There may be more than 2 puppies." Jonah turned toward the hollow. The cry came again, closer now that they were listening for it. Miriam's face hardened. "Go. You stay with her. I stay with her. You find the baby." Jonah took the rope and flashlight and moved down the slope. The second puppy was not under roots. It was inside a rusted drainage pipe half hidden beneath snow and dead grass. Jonah heard it before he saw it, a thin cry bouncing inside metal. He dropped flat on his stomach and shone the flashlight in. 2 eyes reflected, 1 puppy. No, 2, 1 moving, 1 too still. Jonah's heart slammed against his ribs. He reached in, but the pipe narrowed. His hand brushed fur, then slipped. The moving puppy cried harder. "Come on," he whispered. "Come to me." The puppy did not understand. Jonah pulled off his coat, ignoring the cold, and reached deeper. His damaged ear rang from the wind and the metal echo. For a second, sound became chaos, storm, cry, ringing memory. Grace laughing, Grace calling from the frozen pond, Grace's bell in the distance of his mind. Daddy, listen. Jonah shut his eyes hard. Not now. He forced his breathing slow. Listen differently. He tapped the tin cup against the pipe. Tink. The sound traveled through the metal. The puppy stopped crying. Jonah tapped again. Tink. A tiny shape moved toward the sound. That's it, Jonah whispered. Follow it. The puppy crawled forward inch by inch until Jonah could reach the scruff gently and slide him out. He wrapped him fast, then reached back for the second puppy. Still warm, barely. He pulled that one out too and pressed it to his chest. Come on, he said. Come on. The puppy did not move. Jonah rubbed its tiny body with both hands, sheltering it from the wind, breathing warm air over its muzzle. A memory rose again, Grace's cold mitten in his hand, the impossible silence after the pond. No, Jonah said, voice breaking. Not this one too. He rubbed harder. The tiny puppy jerked, once, then coughed, then gave the smallest cry Jonah had ever heard. Jonah bowed his head over both puppies and shook. Miriam called from above. Jonah. He swallowed the old grief down enough to answer. I have two. Alive. He looked at the little bundle. Alive. When he climbed back up, Miriam had wrapped the mother dog in a thermal blanket and was trying to coax drops of water onto her tongue. The blind German shepherd lifted her head weakly when Jonah brought the puppies close. Miriam placed all three pups near her nose. The mother smelled them. Then, with the last of her strength, she licked each one. Once, twice, counting them by touch. Miriam watched, eyes shining. She needs a name. Jonah looked at the dog, blind, starving, half-frozen. Still she had found a cabin, made sound with a cup, and refused to stop until someone heard her. Faith, he said. Miriam looked at him. The name surprised him too, but it was right. The German shepherd rested her chin near the puppies and closed her clouded eyes. Miriam touched Jonah's arm. Let's get Faith home. Jonah looked toward the cabin light. For the first time in years, the word home did not feel like a place that had ended. It felt like a place something wounded might still reach. Faith made it back to the cabin because Jonah carried her. She fought him at first, not with strength. She had almost none, but with fear. Her body stiffened when his arms slid beneath her chest and hips. A low sound vibrated in her throat, more memory than warning. I know, Jonah whispered. I know. Miriam stood beside him, holding the crate with the three puppies wrapped inside. Keep her head close to your chest, she said. Let her hear your heartbeat. Jonah looked at her. Miriam did not soften the command. She can't see you. She needs another way to know where she is. So Jonah lifted Faith carefully and held her close. The German shepherd trembled against him, all bones and wet fur and stubborn life. Her ear pressed near his coat. After a few seconds, the growl faded. Her breathing did not calm exactly, but it began to follow the rhythm beneath Jonah's ribs. His heartbeat. He had spent years feeling like that heart only continued out of habit. Now something was listening to it like it mattered. The climb back nearly broke him. Snow pulled at his boots. Faith was not heavy the way a healthy shepherd should have been, and that made carrying her worse. She felt too light, too close to gone. Twice Jonah's foot slipped. Once Miriam grabbed his arm and held him steady with surprising strength. Do not drop my dog, she said. Your dog. Any dog in danger is temporarily mine. Jonah almost smiled, almost. Inside the cabin, they laid Faith beside the stove on thick blankets. Miriam placed the puppies close enough for her to smell, but not so close they would be crushed if she startled. The first rescued puppy cried softly. Faith's nose moved toward him. Jonah watched her gather them by sound and scent. 1, 2, 3. When all three were near her, her body seemed to loosen as if some terrible count inside her had finally been answered. Miriam worked quickly. Warm towels, small drops of water, a little sugar on the gums. Check the paws, check the belly, check the eyes, check the gums. She moved like someone who had done this too many times and still refused to become numb. Jonah fed the fire. Outside, the storm leaned against the cabin with both hands. Inside, the puppies began to breathe steadier. For nearly an hour, Hope entered quietly. Faith accepted water from Miriam's fingers. One puppy nursed, then another. The smallest one, the still one from the pipe, squeaked and kicked weakly against his brother. Miriam sat back on her heels. All right, she said softly. All right, Mama, that's a start. Jonah let himself exhale. That was when Faith coughed. It was not loud, it was not dramatic, but Miriam's face changed instantly. Faith coughed again. This time her whole body tightened around it. Jonah turned from the stove. What? Miriam leaned in, listening to Faith's chest. Move the lamp closer, Jonah obeyed. Miriam pressed her ear near Faith's ribs, then checked her gums again. What is it? Jonah asked. Miriam did not answer quickly enough. Faith's breathing grew wet. The puppies rooted against her belly, unaware that the body keeping them warm was beginning to fail. Miriam, She may have pneumonia or fluid stress from exposure, could be infection, could be all of it. What does she need? Clinic, you have a rescue barn. I have blankets, food, and stubborn volunteers. She needs oxygen, antibiotics, maybe x-rays, fluids. My barn isn't enough. Then we take her. Miriam looked toward the window. The storm had worsened. Snow buried the lower half of the glass. The road from Jonah's cabin to town wound along a narrow ridge with no guardrail in 3 places. In daylight it was unpleasant. At midnight in a blizzard it was a dare. Miriam's voice lowered. She may not survive the ride. She may not survive staying. Neither of them spoke. Faith coughed again. The smallest puppy stopped nursing and cried. Jonah stood. I have the old snowcat in the shed. Miriam looked at him sharply. That thing runs. It ran when Grace was 6. That was years ago. I know. Jonah. He was already moving toward the back room. He pulled on heavier gloves, took the emergency keys from a hook, and grabbed a canvas tarp. He opened the mudroom door, and cold rushed in like a warning. Miriam followed him. You can barely hear on the left in a storm. I don't need my left ear to drive. You need every sense you have. I have enough. Miriam stepped in front of him. No, you have grief wearing a coat and pretending it is courage. The words stopped him. For a long second, the only sound was Faith's rough breathing from the next room. Jonah's face hardened. You want her to die on my floor? Miriam's eyes flashed. I want you to understand that saving her does not mean punishing yourself. He looked away, too close. Miriam had always been dangerous that way. Some people talked around pain. Miriam walked straight to it and turned on the light. Jonah reached for the door again. Get her ready. The snowcat did run. Barely. It coughed, smoked, died twice, then came alive with a growl that shook the shed roof. Jonah cleared snow from the front blade and backed it toward the cabin, while Miriam wrapped Faith and the puppies in layers of blankets. They moved like a field unit. No wasted words. Faith was placed on a padded board. The puppies were secured in a warmed crate beside her. Miriam climbed into the back with them, one hand on Faith's shoulder, the other on the crate. Jonah took the wheel. The cabin disappeared behind them. The snowcat crawled down the ridge road at a speed that felt both too slow and too dangerous. The headlights tunneled through white. The left side of Jonah's world came and went, sound bending strangely in the storm. When wind slammed the vehicle from that side, he felt it more than heard it. Miriam shouted from the back, Slow near the bend. I know the bend. Knowing is not seeing. He slowed. The snowcat slid anyway. For one breath, the whole machine drifted toward the edge where the ridge dropped into darkness. Jonah turned into the slide, hands steady, jaw locked. The treads caught inches from the drop. Miriam did not scream. Jonah respected that. Faith coughed again. The sound cut through the vehicle. Jonah pushed forward. Halfway to town, the road was blocked. A fallen pine lay across both lanes, thick with snow, branches tangled with power lines that sagged dangerously low. Jonah stopped. Miriam climbed forward and stared through the windshield. No, Jonah killed the engine. What are you doing? Clearing it. With live lines, they may not be live. That is not a plan. That is a sentence people say before funerals. Faith's breathing rattled behind them. Jonah looked at the tree, then down the slope beside the road. There was a service cut, narrow and half-buried, that led toward the old mill road. It would take longer, it might be passable, or it might trap them in the trees. Miriam followed his gaze. Don't. It connects to town. In summer. Faith coughed again, then went frighteningly quiet. Miriam turned back fast. Faith! The German shepherd's head had dropped. Her body was still, too still. The puppies squirmed in the crate, crying now. Miriam checked her. Jonah! He heard the fear. That did what shouting could not. He turned the snowcat toward the service cut. Branches scraped the sides. Snow rose over the treads. Twice the machine bogged down. Once Jonah had to reverse and ram through a drift. Miriam braced herself over Faith, shielding the dog from every jolt. Talk to her, Miriam shouted. Jonah gripped the wheel. What? Talk to her. He looked at the rearview mirror. Faith lay under the blankets, blind eyes half open, breath shallow. Jonah's throat tightened. He had talked to soldiers under fire, talked to rookies through panic, talked to commanders in rooms where one wrong word could send men into danger. But talking to a dying dog felt harder. Faith, he said. His voice sounded rough. The German shepherd's ear moved slightly. That tiny movement broke something open. You found me, Jonah said. You hear that? You found the most stubborn man in Hollow Creek and made him open a door. Miriam watched him. Jonah kept his eyes on the trail. You brought me your babies. You used that cup like a bell. Smart girl. Bell. The word entered the vehicle and changed the air. Jonah's hands tightened on the wheel. Grace's bell. Faith's tin cup. Sound calling him back. The smallest puppy cried. Jonah swallowed. My daughter had a bell, he said. She used to ring it when she wanted one more story. I used to pretend I didn't hear it sometimes because I was tired. His voice thinned. I'd give anything to hear it now. Faith's breathing hitched. Miriam said softly, "Keep going." Jonah drove through the dark, speaking to the dog he had met less than 2 hours earlier like confession had always been waiting for a witness. He told Faith about Grace's laugh, about the stuffed dog named Captain, about the frozen pond behind the school, about how one moment of turned back and bad ice became the border between before and after. He did not describe the worst part. He did not need to. Faith breathed, once, then again. By the time the lights of Miriam's rescue barn appeared through the storm, Jonah's voice was nearly gone. The barn was not a clinic, but it was alive. 2 volunteers were already there, called by Miriam before she left. One opened the gate. Another waved them toward the side entrance. Heat lamps glowed red inside. Blankets waited. An oxygen concentrator hummed in the corner. Miriam moved first. "Bring her in." Jonah carried Faith again. This time, when he lifted her, she did not growl. Her head rested against his chest, ear near his heartbeat. Inside the barn, Miriam and her volunteers worked over Faith with quiet urgency. Oxygen, fluids, warming pads, antibiotics from the emergency cabinet. The puppies were checked, weighed, warmed, and placed close to their mother one at a time. Jonah stood back, soaked and shaking. Useless, that was the word his mind offered. It had always been cruel that way. Then Miriam pointed at him without looking up. "You sit beside her. I'll be in the way. You'll be her anchor." So he sat. Faith's head lay on a folded blanket. Her clouded eyes turned toward the sound of him lowering himself beside her. Jonah placed his hand on the floor near her muzzle. "No cages," he whispered. "No shouting, just warmth." Faith moved her nose until it touched his knuckles. The oxygen mask hissed softly. For the first time since Grace died, Jonah let another living thing need him without stepping away. Then the barn door slammed open. A man stood in the entrance, tall and broad in a black contractor's jacket, snow on his shoulders, clipboard in one hand. Ellis Brandt, county clearance contractor. The man who had been buying abandoned properties around Hollow Creek and tearing down anything that did not earn money. His eyes moved from Miriam to Faith to the puppies. His face showed irritation, not concern. "There they are," he said. "Those dogs are coming with me." Faith lifted her head, and all 3 puppies began to cry. Ellis Brandt stepped into Miriam Cole's rescue barn like a man entering a building he had already decided should not exist. Snow fell from his boots onto the clean rubber mats. His black contractor's jacket was zipped to his throat, and the clipboard in his hand had a county seal clipped to the top. He looked at Faith and her 3 puppies the way some men look at broken furniture left on a curb. Jonah rose slowly. Miriam did not. She stayed beside Faith with one hand near the oxygen tube. "Get out of my barn, Ellis." Brandt smiled without warmth. "Good evening to you too, Miriam. It is not good and you are not welcome." His eyes shifted to Jonah. "Mercer." Jonah said nothing. He knew Brandt by reputation, which was enough. The man cleared abandoned properties, old barns, condemned houses, foreclosed lots, anything the county wanted cleaned before spring development bids. People called him efficient when they were being polite. Miriam called him a vulture. Brandt lifted the clipboard. "I'm here about animals removed from county-contracted land." Miriam's voice sharpened. "Those animals were dying in a storm. They were found on the Miller's Hollow parcel." Jonah frowned. "That land is abandoned." "Not anymore, it's under clearance review. My crew was scheduled to start tomorrow, weather permitting." Miriam stood now. "You were going to clear that hollow with puppies trapped in a drainage pipe?" "I didn't know there were puppies." Faith growled. It was weak, but it filled the space between them. Brandt looked at her. "She's a liability." Jonah stepped forward. "She's a mother. She's an unregistered stray on contracted land." Miriam laughed once, hard and humorless. "Oh, that will look beautiful in the report. Blind, starving mother dog with newborn pups listed as debris." Brandt's face tightened. "You always make this emotional." "It is emotional. That's what decent people feel when living things suffer." Brandt looked back at Jonah. "And you involved now?" Jonah's damaged ear rang slightly from the storm, the barn noise, the puppy's cries. He turned his head so his good ear faced Brandt. "I found them." "Then you should have called County Animal Control. Phone lines were down. You should have waited." Jonah's eyes went cold. "The puppies would be dead." Brandt shrugged. "Not much, just enough." That was the moment Jonah stopped seeing a bureaucrat and started seeing the real threat. Miriam stepped between them. "What do you want?" Brandt held out a paper. "Temporary transfer. Any animals found on a clearance parcel go to county holding until ownership status is reviewed." Miriam did not take the paper. County holding is full. Then they'll be moved to an approved facility. Which one? That's not your concern. Faith tried to lift her head higher. One puppy squeaked, searching for warmth. Jonah looked at the German shepherd. She could not see Brant, but she knew. Her body had gone rigid under the blanket. Her ears tracked his voice with terrified precision. She had heard this man before. Jonah turned back. You were in Miller's Hollow tonight. Brant blinked once. I inspect sites. In a blizzard. I do my job. Did your job include leaving a blind dog and puppies under roots? Brant's jaw shifted. Careful, Mercer. Miriam looked between them. Jonah moved closer. Did you know she was there? Brant's smile returned, smaller now. Maybe the dog was living there, maybe she wandered in, maybe she belongs to someone. That's exactly why amateurs shouldn't interfere. Faith coughed. Miriam immediately turned back to her. Jonah saw Brant glance toward the door, toward escape. Toward the story he wanted to carry out before anyone could ask the right question. A volunteer named Lacey came in from the supply room holding towels. She stopped when she saw Brant. Her face went pale. Miriam noticed. Lacey. The young woman looked at the floor. Brant's eyes narrowed. Jonah saw it. Fear, not of the storm, of him. Miriam's voice softened. Lacey, do you know something? Brant snapped. This is not an interrogation. Jonah turned fully toward him. No, it's becoming one. Brant took one step toward the door. Jonah moved first, not blocking him completely, just changing the distance. The old training returned without drama. Position, exit, hands, eyes, threat. Brant saw it and stopped. Lacey whispered, there was a cup. Everyone turned. The young volunteer swallowed. What cup? Miriam asked. Lacey pointed toward the table where Jonah had placed the dented tin cup after arriving. That one, I saw it before. Jonah's chest tightened. Where? Lacey looked at Brant. He spoke before she could. She's mistaken. I'm not, Lacey said, voice shaking but stronger. It was hanging on a nail inside the old pump shed at Miller's Hollow. I helped tag the property 2 weeks ago. There was a dog bowl, chains, and that cup. I remember because it had a little star scratched on the bottom. Jonah picked up the cup. He turned it over. There, scratched into the dented metal, was a tiny, uneven star. His breath caught. Grace used to draw stars like that on everything. 5 uneven points, one always too long. Miriam saw his face. Jonah. He did not answer. Brant reached for the cup. Jonah pulled it back. Don't. Brant's voice hardened. That belongs with the property record. No, Jonah said. This belongs with the dog. Lacey stepped closer to Miriam. I heard barking when we tagged the parcel, she said. I told Mr. Brant. Brant turned on her. You heard wind. I heard puppies. You heard what you wanted to hear because Miriam fills this place with rescue fantasies. Miriam's eyes blazed. Careful. Lacey's voice shook harder now. He said the county wouldn't delay clearance for strays. He said if we reported every animal, we'd never finish a job. Brant pointed at her. You are done working for me? Jonah moved, not violently, just one step. Brant's hand dropped. The barn went quiet except for Faith's breathing. Miriam took the paper from Brant's hand, looked at it, and gave a bitter smile. This isn't signed by animal control. It will be in the morning. Then come back in the morning. Brant's eyes narrowed. You think this ends here? No, Miriam said. I think this finally starts here. Brant looked at Jonah. You don't know what you're protecting. Jonah held up the tin cup. I know what she used to save her puppies. Brant's face changed. For 1 second, anger revealed something beneath it. Fear. Then he turned and walked toward the barn door. At the threshold, he looked back. That land will be cleared at sunrise. Anything left there gets hauled out. Miriam stepped forward. Threaten these dogs again, and I will make sure every church bulletin, diner table, and county meeting hears about it. Brant smiled. Miriam, half the county already thinks you're a crazy old widow with too many dogs. She smiled back. And yet here you are, scared of me. The smile left his face. He walked out into the store. When the door shut, Lacey began to cry. Miriam pulled her close. You did right. I should have said something earlier. Yes, Miriam said softly, but you said it now. Jonah stood by the table, staring at the star on the bottom of the cup. His hands had gone cold, not from weather, from memory. Grace had once owned a tin cup, a camping cup, dented from being dropped. She had scratched a star into the bottom with a nail from his toolbox and proudly told him it was now a magic cup that could call lost things home. Jonah had forgotten, or tried to. Miriam came beside him. Jonah, this was Grace S. The barn seemed to still. Miriam looked down at the cup. You're sure? He nodded. She used it when we camped behind the cabin. I thought it was lost after. He stopped. After the accident. Miriam's voice became very quiet. How would it end up in Miller's Hollow? Jonah looked toward Faith. The blind German shepherd lay with her head low, ears turned toward him. Her cloudy eyes saw nothing, yet somehow she had carried the one object that could make him listen. Lacey wiped her face. "There's something else." Jonah looked at her. The pump shed had old boxes inside. Some looked like donations, kids' toys, blankets, stuff from the church drive after the flood years ago. Miriam's mouth tightened. The flood was the year Grace died. Jonah gripped the cup. Grace's things had been donated afterward, not by him. He had been too broken to decide. Neighbors had helped. Boxes had gone to church storage, then relief drives, then wherever need took them. Somehow Grace's cup had ended up in that hollow. Somehow Faith had found it. Somehow she had known sound could reach a man who had stopped answering life. Faith coughed again. The mystery had to wait. Miriam turned back to her. "She's still not stable." Jonah knelt beside Faith. The German shepherd's nose moved toward the cup in his hand. He placed it near her muzzle. She touched it once. Tink. A tiny sound. All three puppies stirred. Jonah looked at Miriam. "They know that sound. Maybe she used it to call them. Or to guide them." Miriam checked Faith's paws and frowned. "What?" "She walked farther than we thought. Pads are torn under the ice damage." Jonah looked toward the barn door, Miller's Hollow, the pump shed, Brant clearing at sunrise. If there were records, other dogs, evidence, it would be gone by morning. Miriam read his face. "No. We need to go back. Faith needs you here. The land gets cleared at sunrise. Then we call Sheriff Dale. Lines are down. Then we wait until they're up. And if Brant goes back first?" Silence. Faith lifted her head. Weakly, painfully, she pushed the tin cup with her nose. Tink. Then she turned her ears toward the storm, not toward the hollow, toward the barn's back wall. Jonah followed the direction. A small storage room sat there, used for donated blankets and crates. Its door was half open. Faith whined. Miriam noticed. "What is it, girl?" Faith pushed the cup again. Tink. From inside the storage room came a sound, not an echo, not the storm, a faint scratch. Jonah stood. Lacey whispered, "We checked that room." The scratch came again. Miriam grabbed a flashlight. Jonah opened the storage room door wider. Blankets, feed bags, crates, old boxes stacked against the wall. The scratch came from behind the boxes. Jonah moved them aside. There, half hidden under a torn tarp near a vent gap, was another puppy, a fourth, cold, silent, barely moving. Miriam gasped. Faith tried to stand. Jonah lifted the tiny puppy and brought it into the light. It was smaller than the others, and tied loosely around its neck with a faded blue ribbon was a small silver bell. Grace's bell. The silver bell on the fourth puppy's neck did not ring at first. It only lay there, dull and small against the puppy's fur, tied with a faded blue ribbon. Jonah Mercer knew better than his own reflection. Grace's ribbon, Grace's bell. For a moment Jonah could not feel his hands. The puppy rested in his palms, cold and limp, its little chest moving so faintly that each breath looked like it might be the last. The bell shifted against its neck but made no sound, clogged with years of dust and the damp cold of wherever it had been hidden. Miriam came to life first. "Table," she said. Jonah did not move. Miriam's voice sharpened. "Jonah, table, now." He carried the puppy to the treatment table and laid it on warm towels. Miriam worked quickly, untying the ribbon with the care of someone handling both a life and a wound. The bell came loose and rolled once across the towel. This time it rang. One tiny note, clear, silver. Jonah stepped back as if struck. The sound did not fill the barn. It filled years. Grace in her room. Grace laughing under blankets. Grace calling for one more story. Grace ringing the bell from the porch because she had found a caterpillar and declared it an emergency. Jonah's damaged left ear barely caught the sound, but the right one did. His heart caught the rest. Faith lifted her head from the floor. Her blind eyes opened. The puppies stirred. Miriam froze for half a second, then returned to the fourth puppy. "Breathe, little one," she whispered. "Come on." Jonah stood uselessly, the old nightmare rising behind his eyes. Ice, pond, silence. The sound he did not hear in time. The bell he had locked away because it proved the world could call and he could still fail to answer. The fourth puppy jerked. Miriam rubbed its chest. "Jonah, I need you." He shook his head. Miriam looked at him, fierce and gentle all at once. "Not back there, here." He forced himself forward. "What do I do?" Warm hands, rub the paws, gentle, keep talking. He placed his fingers around the tiny paws. They were like twigs wrapped in fur. "Hey," he whispered, voice breaking. "Hey, little fighter." The puppy did not respond. Faith whined from the floor. Jonah looked at her. The blind German shepherd was trying to stand. "No," he said. "Stay." She ignored him. Her front legs shook. Her ribs pulled with every breath. She rose only halfway before collapsing again, but her nose pointed toward the treatment table, toward the puppy, toward the bell. Jonah understood. He picked up the silver bell. His hand trembled so badly the ribbon shook. Miriam watched him. "Jonah, I can't." "Yes," she said softly, "you can." He looked at the puppy, then at Faith. This blind mother had carried a tin cup through a storm because sound was the only map she had left. She had led him to 3 puppies. Then somehow in Miriam's own barn she had sensed the 4th hidden behind boxes, and that 4th puppy carried Grace's bell. Jonah did not understand it, but he no longer believed understanding had to come before mercy. He rang the bell once. A small silver sound moved through the barn. The 4th puppy twitched. Miriam leaned closer. Again. Jonah rang it again. The puppy's mouth opened. No sound came. Miriam rubbed faster. Again. Jonah rang the bell a 3rd time. The puppy coughed, then cried, weak, thin, alive. Miriam laughed through tears. "There you are." Jonah's knees almost gave out. Faith answered from the floor with a broken whine, and the other puppies began to cry with her, tiny voices rising around the old barn until the place felt less like a rescue shelter and more like a chapel built from sound. Jonah held the bell against his palm. For years he had thought silence protected him, but silence had not protected him. It had only kept him alone. The barn door burst open again. This time it was not Brant. Sheriff Dale Harrow stepped inside with 2 deputies behind him, all 3 covered in snow. Dale was a heavy-set man with kind eyes and a face made tired by too many winters of small-town trouble. "Miriam," he said, "you called half the county." "Lines were down," Miriam said, "so I called the half that still owns trucks." Dale looked at Faith, the puppies, Jonah, the bell, then Lacey standing near the feed room with red eyes. "What happened?" Brant's voice answered from behind him. "That's what I'd like to know." Ellis Brant pushed in past the deputies, no longer smiling. His coat was open now, his hair wet with melted snow, his face flushed with anger. Jonah's hand closed around the bell. Sheriff Dale turned. "Ellis, I told you to wait outside. And I told you my contracted property has been illegally entered, animals removed, and now I see stolen items being handled." Miriam stepped between Brant and Faith. "Those animals were dying." Brant pointed at Jonah. "And that man trespassed." Jonah turned his good ear toward him. "I rescued puppies from a drainage pipe." "You removed animals and property from county land." Lacey stepped forward. "He knew they were there." Brant spun toward her. "Quiet." The word cracked across the barn. Faith growled. This time the sound was stronger. Sheriff Dale noticed. So did everyone else. Lacey stepped closer to Miriam, but she did not retreat. "I told him," she said. 2 weeks ago, I heard barking in the pump shed. He said we weren't paid to save strays." Brant laughed. "She's upset because I fired her." "You fired her 5 minutes ago," Jonah said. Brant glared at him. Sheriff Dale raised a hand. "Enough," Miriam pointed to the table. "The 4th puppy was hidden in my storage room." Dale frowned. "Here, we found it behind donation boxes near the vent." Brant's eyes flicked toward the storage room. Jonah saw it, the quick glance, the mistake. Dale saw it too. "You know something about that room, Ellis." Brant's face hardened. "I know this place is a mess." Jonah lifted the bell. "Then how did Grace Mercer's bell end up around that puppy's neck?" The sheriff's face softened with recognition. Everyone in Hollow Creek knew about Grace. Brant looked away. "I don't know anything about a bell." Miriam's voice dropped. "That bell was in a church donation box after Grace died, the same boxes Lacey saw in Miller's Hollow." Dale turned to Lacey. "Is that true?" Lacey nodded. "The pump shed had donation boxes. Blankets, toys, some were from the flood drive years ago." Miriam's mouth tightened. "Ellis had the county contract to clear the old church storage after the flood." Brant snapped. "So what? Old junk moves around." Jonah stepped closer. "Not by itself." Dale looked at Brant. "Ellis, why would a puppy from Miller's Hollow be hidden inside Miriam's barn?" Brant's jaw worked. "I have no idea." Faith pushed herself up. This time, before anyone could stop her, the blind German shepherd stood. Her legs shook violently. Miriam reached for her, but Jonah lifted a hand. "Wait." Faith lowered her nose to the floor. She sniffed. Then she began to move, slowly, painfully, past her puppies, past Miriam, past Jonah, toward Ellis Brant. The barn went silent. Brant took a step back. Faith kept coming, blind eyes clouded, ears fixed on the sound of his breathing. She was weak, but every step had purpose. She stopped 3 feet from him and lifted her head. Then she barked. Once, Brant flinched. A small metal sound answered from inside his coat. Jonah heard it. So did Faith. So did Dale. The sheriff's eyes narrowed. "What's in your pocket?" Brant's face went blank. "Nothing." Dale held out his hand. "Show me." "This is ridiculous." "Then make it quick." Brant hesitated. That was enough. One deputy stepped closer. Brant reached slowly into his coat and pulled out a ring of keys. They jingled in his hand. Faith barked again. The tin cup on the table vibrated faintly with the sound. Lacey whispered, "Those are the pump shed keys." Brant glared at her. Dale took the keys. One had a strip of blue tape on it. Miriam stepped closer. "I put blue tape on my storage room's spare key after the lock stuck last month." She looked at Brant. "That key went missing 2 days ago." Brant said nothing. Dale examined the ring, then looked toward the storage room. "Ellis!" Brant's face changed. Cornered men do not always run first. Sometimes they talk too much. "You people don't understand what Miriam has done to this county," he said. "Every stray, every sick animal, every abandoned dog becomes a public guilt trip. Land gets delayed. Cleanup gets delayed. Money gets wasted. I moved one dying pup into her barn because I knew she'd find it before morning." Miriam stared at him. "One dying pup," Brant pointed toward Faith. "That blind dog kept dragging them back from the shed. I moved the weakest one. I was going to call it in when roads cleared." Jonah's voice was ice. "With Grace's bell tied around its neck." Brant looked at him. Something ugly moved across his face. "I found the bell in the boxes, thought it might make Miriam emotional enough to take responsibility. I didn't know it was yours." The barn went very still. Jonah took one step. Dale moved quickly between them. "Jonah," Brant smirked. That was his second mistake. Faith lunged. Not far. She had no strength for far, but she moved fast enough to knock the key ring from Dale's hand. It hit the floor and slid under the treatment table. The silver bell rang in Jonah's hand. The puppies cried. Brant bolted. He shoved past the deputy nearest the door and ran into the storm. Dale shouted. Jonah moved before thought. He ran after him. The cold hit hard, but Jonah barely felt it. Brant was already halfway across the yard, heading toward a dark pickup parked beyond the fence. Snow made every step clumsy. Jonah's left ear filled with wind and ringing, but his right caught the sound of boots breaking crust. Behind him, Dale shouted for Brant to stop. Brant did not. Jonah reached the gate as Brant slipped, caught himself, and kept running. Then Faith barked from the barn, one sharp sound. Jonah stopped. Not because he wanted to, because beneath that bark he heard something else. A metallic creak above the yard. The old barn sign, loosened by the storm, had torn partly free from its chain and was swinging hard in the wind directly over the path Brant was taking. Jonah turned his head, tracking sound. Creak, snap. "Brant!" he shouted. Brant looked back. The chain broke. The heavy wooden sign dropped from the post. Jonah lunged forward and tackled Brant sideways into the snow. The sign crashed where Brant had been standing. For 2 seconds, nobody moved. Then Dale and the deputies reached them. Brant stared at the broken sign, face white. Jonah rolled off him, breathing hard. "You saved him," Dale said, surprised. Jonah looked toward the barn. Faith stood framed in the doorway beside Miriam, shaking but upright. "No," Jonah said. "She did." Brant did not fight after that. Maybe the fall scared him. Maybe the sight of the blind dog who had warned the man trying to harm her broke through something even paperwork and profit could not cover. Or maybe he simply knew it was over. The deputies cuffed him and led him to the sheriff's truck. Inside the barn, Miriam tied the blue ribbon and silver bell loosely near Faith's blanket, not around the puppy this time, but where all the pups could hear it. Jonah knelt in front of Faith. "You heard the sign," he said. Faith leaned forward and touched her nose to his hand. He laughed once, breathless and broken. "I almost didn't." Miriam stood beside him. "But you did." The words settled over him. "You did, not too late, not this time." Faith sank back onto the blanket, exhausted beyond fear. Her puppies pressed against her. The fourth, the one with the bell, rooted clumsily beneath her chin. Jonah sat beside them until dawn. When the first pale light entered the barn windows, Faith was still breathing. All 4 puppies were alive. Ellis Brant was in custody, and Grace's bell, after years of silence, lay on the blanket between a blind German shepherd and the man she had taught to hear again. By morning, Hollow Creek looked softer than it had any right to look. Snow covered the barns, fences, roads, and rooftops in clean white, hiding the broken branches and tire ruts and fear of the night before. The storm had passed east, leaving behind a pale sky and a silence that felt different from the one Jonah Mercer knew. This silence was not empty. It was resting. Faith slept beneath a heat lamp in Miriam Cole's rescue barn, her 4 puppies tucked against her belly like small promises. Her breathing was still rough, and Miriam warned everyone who came near that hope was not the same as certainty. But Faith had survived the night. So had her puppies. For now, that was enough. Sheriff Dale returned at sunrise with coffee, paperwork, and a face that said the case had grown bigger than anyone expected. Ellis Brant had talked after his arrest, not out of remorse. Men like him rarely began there. He talked because he wanted blame spread around before it landed fully on him. He named county shortcuts, abandoned property contracts, old donation boxes sold instead of stored, animals ignored because reporting them delayed work. Miller's Hollow had not been only a forgotten patch of land. It had become a place where unwanted things were left until the county could pretend they had vanished. Old furniture, broken crates, donated blankets, children's toys from flood storage, and dogs. Faith had likely been dumped there weeks earlier, already blind or nearly blind, already pregnant, surviving in the pump shed with what scraps she could find. After giving birth, she used the only tools available to her: scent, memory, sound. The tin cup, Grace's tin cup. No one knew how Faith chose it. Maybe the smell of old food clung to it. Maybe the cup made a sound her puppies learned to follow. Maybe, as Miriam said quietly, some things are chosen by a wisdom that does not ask permission from logic. Jonah stood near the treatment table, holding the cup in one hand and Grace's silver bell in the other, two sounds from two lives. Both had found their way back to him through a blind dog. Miriam came beside him. "You should go home and sleep." Jonah looked at Faith. "I'm fine." "You are not fine, but you are upright, which is more than I expected." He almost smiled. Miriam poured coffee into the dented tin cup before he could stop her. He stared at it. She shrugged. "It's a cup, Jonah. Sacred things can still be useful." He took it. The metal was warm in his hand. For years, he had treated Grace's memory like glass, something to lock away, something that could only cut him if touched. But Faith had dragged those memories back into the light, not to hurt him, but to put them back to work. The bell had called a puppy back. The cup had guided a mother through snow. Love, Jonah realized, did not want to be stored forever. It wanted to be spent. Over the next days, Hollow Creek changed around Faith. People came quietly at first. One rancher brought clean straw and pretended he was just passing through, though his place was 12 miles away. A church group brought towels, food, and a box of puppy blankets. Lacey arrived every morning, red-eyed but determined, and helped Miriam document everything she remembered about Brant's crew. Sheriff Dale opened a full investigation. Brant's contracts were suspended. The Miller's Hollow parcel was sealed. Animal Control searched the old pump shed and found more proof: chain marks, food wrappers, scraps of donation records, and a pile of old belongings from the flood storage that should have been kept safe or given properly. Among them were two items Jonah had not seen in years: Grace's little yellow raincoat and the stuffed dog she had named Captain. When Dale brought them to the barn in a clean evidence bag, Jonah had to sit down. Miriam did not speak. She simply sat beside him. The raincoat was faded, but he remembered the day Grace wore it jumping in puddles behind the cabin. Captain had lost his button eye just like before. Jonah touched the plastic bag but did not open it. Not yet. Faith woke at the sound of the bag crinkling. Her ears lifted. One of the puppies squeaked. Jonah looked at her through the blur in his eyes. "You found what I couldn't," he said. Faith thumped her tail once against the blanket. The smallest puppy, the one who had worn Grace's bell, grew stronger by the hour. Miriam named him Scout because he kept wandering in tiny circles, bumping into his siblings, then crying as if the world had betrayed him. Jonah argued that no puppy that small needed a name yet. Miriam ignored him. She named the others Hope, River, and Captain. When she said Captain, Jonah turned sharply. Miriam lifted her chin. Grace had good taste. He did not argue. By the end of the first week, Faith could stand without shaking. By the second, she could walk slowly across the barn. Her blindness was permanent, Miriam said, likely from untreated infection and neglect, but Faith adapted with astonishing grace. She mapped the barn by sound: Miriam's boots, Jonah's slower step, the bell near the puppy pen, the tin cup hanging by the door. Whenever Jonah arrived, Miriam would tap the cup once. Tink. Faith's ears would lift, and her tail would move before he said a word. At first, Jonah told himself he visited because the case required it, then because Miriam needed help repairing the barn gate, then because Faith responded best to his voice. By the third week, he stopped inventing reasons. He came because the barn no longer felt like a place where wounded things waited to die. It felt like a place where they learned new maps. One afternoon, Miriam found him sitting in the puppy pen with Scout asleep on his boot and Faith resting her head near his knee. "You know," she said, "there's a word for this." Jonah looked up. "Exhaustion, fostering." "No, you didn't let me finish." "No," Miriam smiled. Faith sighed and leaned more weight against his leg. Jonah looked down at her. "No," he said again, weaker this time. Miriam hung the tin cup on a hook beside the pen. "Of course." Spring came slowly to Hollow Creek. Snow melted from the fence posts. Miller's Hollow flooded at the low edges. The pump shed was torn down properly, not by Brant's crew, but by county workers watched by the sheriff, Miriam, Lacey, and half the town. Before the final wall came down, Jonah stood inside it alone for a moment. The shed smelled of rust, wet wood, and old sorrow. In one corner, he saw scratch marks near the floor where Faith had likely rested with her newborn pups. Beside them was a patch of wall worn smooth, as if a metal cup had tapped there again and again. Tink, 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 a mother-making sound in the dark. He closed his eyes. For years he had believed he missed the sound that mattered most, Grace's call, the crack of ice, the warning that might have saved her. But standing in that shed, Jonah understood something painful and freeing. Not every loss is a failure to listen. Sometimes the world breaks no matter how hard we are paying attention. And sometimes, by grace alone, we are allowed to hear the next cry. When Faith and her puppies were finally cleared to leave Miriam's barn, the plan was temporary. That was what Jonah said, temporary. He had space at the cabin, quiet woods, no other animals to overwhelm a blind mother, a fenced porch he could repair, a stove that ran strong. Faith would recover there until permanent homes were chosen. Miriam said nothing as he loaded the blankets, puppy crate, special bowls, medicine, and tin cup into his truck. She only handed him Grace's silver bell. He looked at it. "I can't take that. It's yours. It was hers." Miriam's face softened. "That is why it should keep ringing." Jonah took it carefully. Faith rode home in the back seat with her head turned toward his voice. The puppies slept in a crate beside her, piled together under a blanket. Every few minutes, Scout squeaked and Faith touched the crate with her nose. Jonah drove slowly. When the cabin came into view, he felt the old reflex rise, brace. The place had been a museum of absence for years. Grace's room closed, her bell boxed away, her laughter trapped behind memory like a song he was afraid to play. But Faith lifted her head when the truck stopped. She listened. The cabin creaked in the wind. The pines shifted. A chickadee called from the rail. Then Jonah hung the tin cup beside the porch door and tapped it once. Tink. Faith's tail moved. He opened the door and led her inside. She stepped carefully, nose low, mapping the room. Rug, stove, chair, hallway, Jonah's boots, puppy crate. She did not need sight to know whether a place was safe. By evening, the puppies were sleeping near the stove. Faith lay beside them, and Jonah stood in front of the hallway table holding the wooden box. Grace's bell box. He opened it. The inside was empty now. Not because Grace was gone, because the bell had returned to the world. Jonah placed the empty box on the mantel. Then he tied the silver bell by its faded ribbon to the inside of the cabin door, low enough for Faith to hear when it moved. A breeze slipped through the old frame. The bell rang once. Jonah flinched. Then he breathed. Faith raised her head. Scout woke and yawned. Nothing terrible happened. The sound came. The sound went. Jonah remained standing. That night he slept in the chair by the stove, one hand resting near Faith's blanket. Sometime before dawn, he woke to the softest sound. Tink. The bell by the door moving in the draft. Then another sound. Faith breathing, puppies dreaming, the house alive. Jonah closed his eyes again. For the first time in years, silence did not feel like punishment. It felt like peace with room for sound. Months passed. Faith stayed. So did Scout. Hope went to Lacey, who cried so hard during adoption that the puppy licked her chin until she laughed. River went to a retired teacher with a warm kitchen and no grandchildren nearby. Captain went to Sheriff Dale, who insisted he was only holding him for the weekend, then bought a dog bed bigger than his sofa. Miriam never let him forget it. Jonah built a small, fenced run behind the cabin, then a covered shelter. Then, after 3 more abandoned dogs came through Miriam's rescue and needed quiet, he converted the old shed into a recovery room. He called it Grace House. The sign was simple, carved by a man from church. Grace House for lost dogs learning the way home underneath. Jonah hung the dented tin cup. Beside it, the silver bell. Visitors sometimes asked why both were there. Jonah would look toward Faith, who had learned every inch of the yard by sound and heart, then say, "Because sometimes rescue starts when someone finally listens." The blind German shepherd stood beside Jonah Mercer on the porch of Grace House, her ears lifted toward the evening sounds of Hollow Creek. The world was full of them now, wind moving through the pines. Scout barking at a squirrel he had no chance of catching, Miriam's old truck rattling up the drive, the soft bell at the cabin door. The dented tin cup moving gently on its hook. For years, Jonah had believed silence was the only way to survive grief. He had built his life around not hearing what hurt. He closed Grace's room, put away her bell, stopped answering invitations, let the cabin grow quiet enough that nothing could surprise him. Then Faith came through the storm. Blind, starving, carrying a tin cup, not asking for herself, asking for her puppies, asking a broken man to listen one more time. Jonah looked down at her. Her cloudy eyes faced the yard, but her body leaned into his leg with complete trust. She could not see the sunset turning the mountains gold. She could not see Scout rolling in the grass below. She could not see the sign on the shelter wall or the people who came every week with food, blankets, and wounded dogs who needed time. But Faith knew the shape of love without needing to see it. She knew Miriam's step. She knew Jonah's breathing. She knew the bell. She knew home. Miriam came up the porch carrying 2 mugs of coffee. "You're staring again," she said. Jonah took 1 mug. "Thinking. Dangerous habit." He almost smiled. Below them, Scout pounced at the tin cup's shadow and missed completely. Faith lifted her head at the sound and gave 1 low, gentle bark the kind mothers give when children are being foolish but safe. Jonah touched the silver bell by the door. It rang once, clear, small, no longer a sound he feared, a sound he welcomed. Grace was still gone. That truth had not changed. Faith had not erased it. No dog, no rescue, no miracle could give Jonah back the little girl who once rang that bell for one more bedtime story. But Faith had taught him that grief was not a grave he had to live inside forever. Love could become useful again. It could become a rescue barn, a warm blanket, a hand held near a frightened muzzle, a bell that called the living home. Jonah looked toward the road. A car had stopped near the Grace House sign. A woman stepped out slowly, holding a leash attached to an old German shepherd with gray around the face and fear in every line of his body. Miriam followed his gaze. "Another one?" Jonah set down his coffee. Faith's ears lifted. Scout stopped playing. The old dog near the road lowered his head, unsure whether the world still had room for him. Jonah walked down the steps. Faith came with him, slow and steady, guided by the bell, the cup, and the man she had brought back to life. The woman at the road wiped her eyes. "I was told you help the ones nobody else knows what to do with." Jonah looked at the old shepherd, then at Faith, then back at the woman. "We try," he said. Faith stepped forward and touched noses with the old dog. The old shepherd trembled. Then his tail moved once, just once, but enough. Jonah opened the gate, and somewhere behind him the silver bell rang in the wind. That was how Grace House grew, not all at once, not loudly, one wounded life at a time. A blind German shepherd had come to Jonah's window with a tin cup, and the sound had changed everything. She had not only led him to her puppies, she had led him back to mercy, back to purpose, back to a world where pain and love could stand in the same room without destroying each other. In the end, Jonah thought he was rescuing Faith, but Faith had been rescuing him from the moment she tapped the glass. So if this story touched your heart, share it with someone who may need hope tonight. Somewhere, someone is sitting in a quiet room, believing no sound will ever reach them again. Maybe this story is their little bell. And tell us in the comments, has a dog ever helped you through a season you thought you would not survive? If stories of loyalty, faith, and second chances matter to you, subscribe so the next rescue can find you too. And until the next story, may God bless you, guard your home, and help you hear the small sounds of hope when they come tapping at your window.